Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Public Affairs and Government PRSA webinar. The Public Relations Society of America is the nation's leading professional organization serving the communications community with more than 30,000 professional and student members represented across the US. Your host today is the Public Affairs and Government section, which is made up of more than 1,200 communication and public relation practitioners, who serve all levels of government. So a few admin notes before we start today. This webinar is being recorded and it will be distributed later for other additional listening. Listeners are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A section and not the chat function. Due to the volume of questions, we may not get to your question. If you submit a question in the Q&A section, we will do our best to post a webinar scan and try to answer your question via email. So to start off today, I want to introduce our moderator, Felicia Blow, APR, who is an award-winning leader with a 28-year communications career spanning work in manufacturing, waste management, and environmental services, telecommunications, and higher education. She is also the PRSA chair-elect, the co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and the Associate Vice President for Development at Hampton University. Thank you so much, Felicia. I've listened to you on other webinars discussing this subject of diversity and look forward to your moderating our discussion today.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you everyone for joining in. I think we can lose the slide here, and really we want to focus on the faces, the people who are part of this important conversation. I have a few opening remarks, if you don't mind, to stage set, if you will. Again, I'm Felicia Blow. I'm the 2021 chair-elect for PRSA. And as the 2020 co-chair of the National PRSA Diversity and Inclusion Committee, I also led PRSA's national research effort on DE&I amongst our members. The discussion of DE&I is obviously very important to me. I've had discussions with a variety of stakeholders in this area, but today's conversation is especially important as we will be discussing the work of governmental organizations and entities in their efforts to diversify their workforces. Certainly, there have been models amongst government organizations in the area of DE&I. One we know very, very well, the armed forces. Known to be one of the most diverse institutions in America, there's something about DE&I that the armed forces has come to know, understand, and benefit from. At the federal level, there also have been presidential executive orders on DE&I. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management, which serves as the chief human resources agency and policy manager for the federal government, has disseminated a number of concrete strategies and best practices to recruit, hire, develop talent, retain, engage, and motivate a diverse workforce. And after all, by law, the federal government's recruitment policies should endeavor to achieve a workforce from all segments. But in reviewing state government practices, as you know, there are 50 states in the US and several territories. And as you can well imagine, the DE&I strategies for the states are as disparate and different as the states are themselves. For example, here in my state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, our current governor appointed in his administration Virginia's very first chief diversity officer. But there are only a handful of other states with such officers, but we know more are coming. And then as we talk about the third level of government, local government, the same goes. Many differing models with different outcomes and practices. So today's conversation will amplify the importance of government's role in DE&I, as well as how the culture of government is so different from the private sector. The bureaucracy, and I don't mean that in a negative, pejorative way, our governments are bureaucracies. And the required administrative practices of government make these entities so vital to our civil society. That stated, the pace and the approach to D&I is far, far different in many respects than that of private sector and other entities. So today we will shed light on how three unique levels of government are tackling D&I in their organization. Each of our panelists will provide a comprehensive overview of their backgrounds, as well as their personal thoughts on D&I. And in the way of housekeeping, I again want to reiterate some of the things that Barbara shared. First, the initial few minutes, I'd say 30 minutes or so of our conversation, you're going to be hearing directly from our three planned panelists. That's going to take us about 30 minutes or so. But the second half of the program, the remaining 30 minutes, is all about you. So please share your questions with these very bright and astute panelists. They're anxious to hear from you. Next, please use the QA function to post your questions. It's going to be hard to see them and you post in the chat function, and we want to make sure we get all of that information. And finally, as you saw on that last slide, we're going to share that again, and we're going to put it in the chat box and up on your screen. So that if you want to follow up with these very smart individuals, you can do so. So let's get smarter. I didn't make that up, by the way, but I love it. Our first panelist is Marta Lugo. Marta serves as Assistant Officer of External Affairs for Valley Water of California, also known as Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's a leading water resources management agency. And at this agency, Marta is responsible for leading and managing external affairs programs and initiatives to promote and raise awareness and to build broad community-wide support for safe, clean water, flood protection, and environmental stewardship. As part of the leadership team there, Marta serves as the Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Civic Engagement Offices at Valley Water, and she provides strategic oversight of all racial equity, diversity, and civic engagement programs. So Marta, we want to hear from you for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will go to our next panelist.
Great, wonderful. I am so pleased to be with all of you here this afternoon. So just a big thank you to the PRSA chapter for inviting me today. This is very exciting. So as Felicia shared, I do work for Valley Water. It's a local agency, so we're part of local government, and that's kind of our field in terms of providing water. And our READY effort is we have a brand new office that we just created in July under the leadership of our new CEO, Rick Callender, who really created a brand new office of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and really pulled it out of the HR function into its kind of own office under external affairs. So it's a brand new office, but we've been very, very busy underway with a lot of work. And I think, the focus is not just looking internally at diversity and inclusion programs like the historic kind of traditional programs, which we had a very good foundation in terms of a D&I program, but really expanding it beyond just the traditional D&I, which is really incorporating and tackling head-on the aspect of racial equity and the importance of that, not just internally throughout the organization in terms of dismantling institutional racism that may exist through past practices or policies, but also externally, and how we serve our community and ensuring that all the communities that we serve are served equitably in terms of providing environmental justice and social justice in terms of providing safe, clean water to all communities, equitable flood protection, as well as environmental stewardship. So those are the the three components that we focus on Valley Water. But our program is really focused on not just internal, but also the external, and really looking at an organizational change, really a cultural shift in terms of a long-standing program. And so two of the key components that our agency has recently kind of accomplished under this new office is the first, we just adopted, our board, I should say, just adopted a brand new resolution that kind of really sets the framework, kind of starting from the top of the leadership in terms of providing really a vision and a framework for how to achieve these outcomes in terms of not only acknowledging institutional racism, but how do we actually implement and operationalize that? So the resolution is not only very profound in terms of the statement that it makes, but it also has some very concrete resolutions in there for the CEO to take in terms of looking at our contracting practices. How do we work with small minority-owned businesses, not just our workforce internally in terms of recruitment and internship programs, but all the other practices in the organization, our contracting, our grants program. How do we deliver grants to different organizations that and historically may have not had a kind of a slice or of the apple, so to speak. And so it's looking really kind of holistically throughout the organization in that sense. And the resolution kind of serves, several different purposes. Not only does it set kind of that, vision for the entire organization, but it also memorializes really this work so that it's kind of built in throughout the organization. It's not just on the shoulders of the READY office, but all the divisions within our agency have a part to play in delivering the outcomes that are set in the resolution. And again, it also memorializes kind of the vision so that it's not something that's just part of this CEO's vision, but it's ongoing. It's part of the ongoing culture, not just a short-term program that comes and goes because it's in the moment and it's trending and it sounds great and then it fizzles out. That's definitely not the intent of this new office. And I think that's why our agency has put a lot of dedicated resources, including not just the resolution, but staffing behind it and a budget behind it, which I think is critical. So the first, like I mentioned, is the resolution, and it we have it available, but it's basically called Addressing Racism and Promoting Equity. And that's the resolution that we just adopted in September. And then the other piece that we're working on is on environmental justice, not only internally as an agency and that kind of culture and organizational change, but how do we better serve the external community, all the communities that we serve. So we are in the works right now of developing an environmental justice policy, and we're taking that to our full board in February so that they can take a look at these ends policies that come from the board, but really permeate throughout the entire organization. They're not just policies that live in the READY office. They're policies that are meant to impact our water supply strategy, our flood protection strategy, and our environmental stewardship strategies throughout the organization. And so that environmental justice policy is really kind of more of the social justice angle. How do we better serve these communities and disadvantaged communities that often, oftentimes are disproportionately impacted by climate change, often because, they live in flood-prone areas. How do we make sure that they have equitable flood protection projects or environmental justice or environmental stewardship projects that are equitable, and that it's not just affluent communities getting those services. And so that's a little bit about kind of the work we're undertaking. And I think I'm going to pass it on to the next panelist so they have a chance to share. And I will be answering questions as we engage further in the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marta. You said several things that I took note of, and I hope our participants are as well. This equitability, environmental justice, cultural shifts in the organization, and then operationalizing the resolutions that have words on them about how you're going to do better and be better. So I hope the folks who are listening are as intrigued as I am in terms of hearing more about those specifics. But the way we're doing it is we're going to hear 5 to 7 minutes from each panelist and their own words, and then we will go through a few questions and we'll hear from you. So please keep those questions in mind. Our next panelist is Kermit Howard, and Kermit serves as Director of Strategic Human Capital Planning and Evaluation within the U.S. Department of the Interior's Office of Secretary, Policy, management, and budget. Say that 3 times fast. In this role, Kermit advises the Chief Human Capital Officer, the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer, Human Resources Directors, and their staffs on human capital legislation, regulation, and programs. And in his prior work, he has overseen department-wide talent acquisition programs, employee development and training programs that have impacted more than 70,000 employees in more than 2,400 locations across the US and US territories. So Kermit, just don't try to restate your title. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Felicia, and I do appreciate PRSA for the invitation. I will say that my time at the Department of Interior has been one of definitely enlightenment and extreme joy. Prior to coming to Department of Interior, I was at the Office of Personnel Management, and I was their human capital liaison. So I've been with this agency for, on my resume, it says 10 years, but I would say I've been there longer than that as their former human capital liaison. One of the key aspects of my organization, in addition to the things that you've described in my role, is also looking at the human capital initiatives and identifying those initiatives that support the overall strategic goals of the agency. With that, aligning metrics to those strategic initiatives and being able to track those. In addition to that, I also oversee the accountability program, in which conducts independent HR audits, ensuring that our HR operations throughout our organization conduct HR operations in a very compliant-oriented manner. From that, we gather data that informs our leadership on where they can place their resources to improve human resources operation, and also our HR practitioners improve as far as training goes and procedures and practices that they may conduct. One of the things that taking note as far as diversity and inclusion, specifically my office, I am not in that office per se. I'm in the talent arena. But nonetheless, we have a stakehold in this particular area. We've been fortunate enough to meet with leadership recently to identify some of the strategies that they're looking to employ within the next administration. But I want to talk a little bit prior to that as far as how our offices were able to knock down some of the silos that have been built over the years within our federal agencies. And as you mentioned, bureaucracy. Being in a federal agency, we tend to operate in our own lanes. And because of that, there's been a lot of missed opportunity where we can pull our resources and be more strategic on how we approach not only recruitment, but DE&I as a whole. And recently, what we did was that we identified a area in which we could actually grapple onto to create synergy between our offices, not only just DE&I, but our communications office as well. I will say that through the forward thinking of my chief human capital officer, Ray Lamone, he went and hired a communications specialist for our office. And the reason because of that, because we wanted to make sure that our employees were well informed about the policies and practices that we were developing and implementing, and so that they will understand how it would impact their lives. But because of that, we garnered a greater opportunity, because in FY17, FY18, we were faced with a great challenge. One of the things about DE&I is that we talk about recruitment, but then we don't really talk about retention. And one of the key aspects is that if you're going to bring people into an organization, you want to make sure that they want to stay in that organization. And so the challenges that we have faced were in the realm of harassment. Now, it's been well documented that some of our bureaus have had challenges with this particular area. And with our leadership, we had to pull all of our collective thoughts together to think about how we can best address this particular situations. And so what had occurred was that it created that foundational point where we look to our colleagues in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights. We look to our comm folks. We look to our OHC practitioners and discuss how we can pull our collective resources to really address this matter. And in doing so, we established policies that would address those issues that were being touted within our organization. But more so, we wanted to make sure that any policies and practices and procedures that were being implemented, we would have sufficient data to show that they were being impactful. And that's where we look towards the Office of Personnel Management and their tool, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. Now, within this tool, there's certain segments within this survey in which provide the perception of federal employees about their environment. One being global satisfaction, two being the new inclusion quotient, and three being employee engagement. And while global satisfaction and the new IQ have their values, looking at job satisfaction, looking at pay, looking at how supervisors are being able to work with employees from different segments of society, we knew that employee engagement held the best bang for our buck, because that's what really we centered on as far as employees being fully able to operate within the work environment and be as productive as they can, but also feeling safe within their environment. Feeling as though they don't have to worry about being harassed in any form or fashion. And so by doing so, collectively working with our colleagues, we developed specific questions that have been assigned within our Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, and in doing so, be able to garner data from that. Now, this has only been recent, within FY19, but we also utilize those same questions for FY20. So now that we'll have some comparative data to see where the impacts have been made, where we're making progress, and where where we need to make improvements. But along the way, we've been able to garner that synergy between our three offices, making sure that through our comms colleagues and through our communication specialists, every employee from the top to the lowest level understand exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how it's going to impact their lives. So then in that fashion, we can make sure that when we talk about strategic, we move to the next level of talking about strategic targeting of recruitment. We know that we have certain things in place that will enable our employees to feel good about staying within our organization. So I'll just stop at that point and
Wow, Kermit, you way to go. You said a mouthful. I am federal. Tell me the name of that survey again. Federal
Employee Viewpoint Survey.
And I can tell you right now that I want to come back to that and see if maybe, are you able to share with us some of the findings from that
Yes.
survey, from the first one, and then how you, okay, I think that is really important. And
Sure
if you can tell us more, and again, I'm gonna ask so I don't have to think of all these QA, I'm sure this got to be interesting. The fact, who made the judgment call? Who made the decision and how did it come? Now you can hold your powder dry, but we'll come back to it around
Okay, all right.
from bringing a comms professional into the function, because that's one of the core things we need to talk about, is not only the comms function, the HR function, but the overall leadership of the organization and prioritizing. Very, very exciting stuff. Thank you so much for that. And we'll come back. So our last but certainly not least panelist is Mr. Cyrus Salazar. And I love saying that name, by the way. Very, very fun name to say. Cyrus, but is a very serious role, guys. Cyrus serves as the director of the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Office of the Secretary for the Department of Defense. He is responsible for overseeing the development and promulgation of policy and procedural guidance for the department's military equal opportunity, federal equal employment opportunity, and diversity and inclusion, civil rights, and disability programs. He also serves as the principal staff advisor to the Executive Director for Force Resiliency on matters pertaining to oversight responsibility for the direction and enforcement of all DoD, EEO, and MEO policies affecting civilian and military personnel worldwide. Thank you so much, Cyrus, for joining us. You got to be a busy guy.
Felicia, thank you very much. And to my colleagues who are on the panel, it's a pleasure to join you all. And most importantly, to the membership of the PRSA, thank you for an opportunity to spend this afternoon with you all. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to build on the introduction and then showcase the initiatives that we have alive and well within the department to showcase the proactive stance that we are taking in the realm of inclusion and diversity. And as you mentioned, the role, I have the privilege of serving as the Director of the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as serving as the Chief Diversity Officer. And we fall within the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. So we are developing policies, we are issuing guidance, and we help develop the entire portfolio across a range of programs to include not only inclusion and diversity, but also equal employment opportunity, military equal opportunity, disability programs, and civil rights. And having that unique approach where we have this construct in one organization helps us keep our finger on the pulse of the warfighter and our civilian cohort. So we ensure that we are taking a vast look across the department. And specifically, we are providing strategic guidance to our military leadership. And we are spearheading these key initiatives to ensure that we have direct efforts. We are evaluating and we are enhancing and advancing DoD policies so that we can ensure we are getting this right. We also work hand in hand with our civilian personnel policy colleagues, as well as those in our Defense Civilian Personnel Advisory Service. These are the folks who are responsible for talent management, the personnel who are developing the civilian policies, and also the human resources solutions that strengthen our mission readiness. And we aspire towards one goal, and that is number one, ensuring that our people are our most critical aspect of maintaining our national security. And we manage and take care of our people because we realize that that is our most critical mission, putting our people first. And we strive to create opportunities to break down barriers, to identify where we can integrate and where we can collaborate as essential outcomes to everything that we do. But we got to be mindful that when we are shaping policy, that we do not do this in a vacuum. We have a strong partnership with our colleagues in public affairs. So we respond to media queries, we respond to queries from our legislators, and then we have a unified mission set and a voice going back to our leadership, as well as those who are engaging with the media so that we can make sure we have it right. And it's critical that we provide transparency on all policy decisions, and then we assist our leaders in responding timely and effectively in all press engagements when we are talking about equities such as diversity and inclusion and the like. We do meet on a regular basis with our colleagues in public affairs to ensure that messaging is succinct. But this afternoon, I wanted to share with you our commitment that we have within the department. And many of you have responded in your own way to the national narrative and to the tragedies that we've experienced over this past years, dealing with inequity, dealing with those areas where there's been racial unrest. And one thing that our former secretary, Mark Esper, did in June of 2020 is he issued a memorandum to the entire department with a three-pronged approach. And this approach set off a vast action for the department. It was an opportunity for us to take action on discrimination, to address prejudice, to look at bias in all the ranks of the armed forces. So the aim of these initiatives was really to look at what do our policies say? What are our programs and what can we do internally to improve the environment with respect to equal opportunity, to diversity and inclusion, and most importantly, how are we impacting the workforce? So the memo illustrated three things. The first is a short-term sprint where we identified what could we do immediately to effectuate change. We looked at reviewing our military equal opportunity programs. We looked at updating all of our DE&I and our policies. We looked at hairstyle and grooming standards. We looked at those areas based off of input that we received from the warfighters about areas of retention and areas of inclusion. So we empowered them to have a voice. Secondly, we established the Department of Defense Board on Diversity and Inclusion, which was an opportunity for us to dive deeply into our policies. And then lastly, we established a long-term initiative, which is the Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. And this is providing an independent and an enduring assessment that will strengthen this area for generations to come. Now, out of all of these, I really want to focus particularly on our DoD Board on Diversity and Inclusion. We took this so seriously that our former secretary had the Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett, serve as the chair, followed by Honorable Matthew Donovan, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, as well as the SEAC, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We then had representation from all ranks and all walks of life from all branches of the service represented on this cohort, on this board. And ultimately what this came out with was 15 recommendations that really are intended to bolster our inclusion and our diversity across the total force. Our current acting secretary, Miller, endorsed and accepted all 15 recommendations. And if anyone would like to see these, you can go to diversity.defense.gov, or simply go into a web browser and type in DoD diversity. We have a specific section on our website, which has all of our DE&I efforts with our policies in place as well. And then lastly, what did this culminate in? This endeavor was challenging. We reviewed years of literature in this realm. We reviewed past studies. We reviewed research. We reviewed our current outcomes in our in our surveys, and we did crowdsourcing so that we can hear directly from our military and civilian cohort to identify what is it that you feel is something that we can take into consideration. We thought that we would receive maybe a couple of thousand, but we received a huge onslaught of information that we are looking into to help bolster what we're doing in this arena. And then lastly, we understand that things can be done immediately and there can be an evolution of this, and improving diversity and inclusion is going to remain one of the department's highest priorities, and we'll continue to learn as we go forward. But be mindful that shifting culture requires steadfast and durable attention. In the department, we will continue to rely on those external and external expertise to truly amplify our efforts to ensure a diverse workforce at all levels, one that is based on inclusion and one that can be there based on an environment of dignity and respect. So I'm standing by to address any questions, but thank you very much for an opportunity to join you all.
That was awesome, Cyrus. Before we go, Marta, I'm coming to you with the first question because I'm just going to go straight to the QA. Don't go anywhere,
Great.
Cyrus. Where'd you go? He disappeared. You said that you thought that you had, you were only going to get a few thousand. How many did you get in terms of respondents, I suppose?
So we had over 60,000 responses that came in from the total force. And we used the mechanism behind three sources. We used MillSuite, which is an internal platform. We used Google Suite. And we also used what is called our, similar to what Kermit mentioned, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. Internally to the Department of Defense, we have what's called our DOCS, our Defense Organizational Climate Survey. We use the back end of that to ask two questions. If you have anything to contribute in DE&I equal opportunity, please click here, and they could type in whatever they wanted. A tremendous amount of.
Okay, so it's an open-ended survey that asked two questions. So like with Kermit, we want to hear more about that. But Marta, the first question in the Q&A is from Christina Cruz-Benton. Can you share what event or issues came up that asked Valley Water to create the resolution and policy? Is there negative history there? Quite frankly, having served in a waste management organization where, environmental justice, you talked about it, Kermit, with landfill placement, power plant placement, transfer station placement, were predominantly in minority communities. Yeah, it was, I'm not sure if it was likely from everyone singing, merrily, merrily, life goes on. So tell us what was the context for getting to that point?
A great question. So I definitely appreciate that. So I think, historically, many, this organization has been, in place since 1929, and it, historically, at one point was very much a good old boys club. Water is very much dominated by males and kind of historically mostly white folks that were in there, and so over time, they had worked on a D&I program to really increase the diversity and inclusion efforts throughout the organization, recognizing that there's a lot of opportunity for the community because our community in Santa Clara is very diverse, but the organization didn't reflect that, back in the day. This is much before my time. And so, there was, some kind of, historical, issues in terms of those type of issues throughout the organization that the D&I program, or HR D&I program, try to address in terms of boosting recruitment efforts, retention effort. And when I joined, they had a very robust D&I program with a strategic 5-year plan, very much celebratory towards employees of different ethnicities, different all walks of life, and different policies. But I think for our CEO, he's been very much involved in kind of the civil rights arena for a long time. And
Rick's an attorney by trade,
yes,
right? How many
yes,
employees
yes.
at Valley Water?
I don't know the exact number offhand, but I believe it's in the range of about 800, more or less. I would have to double check with our HR, but I think it's in that range. It's under 1,000, but it's I think in the 800 range. But this is something that's been kind of near and dear to our CEO. For like I mentioned, the kind of historical background. And it's not so much what's going on today, which that is obviously a great impetus, but I think this is something that our organization has kind of been over time trying to work towards. But I think the difference now is that we're working not only in terms of just looking at the traditional D&I efforts, which is about more of the HR recruitment and retention and kind of celebrating the kind of more celebratory type of activities, but really looking at how to dismantle past practices in terms of what communities receive funding for flood protection projects. Because there was in the past projects that didn't get funded in more disadvantaged communities, that really did needed to have those flood protection programs. So we had a flooding in 2017 in San Jose, and one of those neighborhoods was the Rock Springs neighborhood that was really much affected because they didn't get the funding that needed to carry out some of that flood protection work. And now it's really taking a look of how do we improve and be of service to the community. That's really what it really boils down to. It's not only internally, but how do we really get to that place of promoting social justice for all communities, as well as environmental justice in the work we do. So it's kind of really much a two-pronged approach.
So we want to hear some specifics when we come back to you around what does it specifically look like to a person on the ground or an employee at Valley Water around building a more diverse culture and being more equitable in these grants. Really want to hear about that in some high degree of specificity, Marta. But Kermit, we'll go to you next because there are 2 questions for you, and these are going to be easy. So we're going to ask both of them to you right now, then I'm going to do mine.
Okay.
The first one is, are you staying on in the Biden administration?
So yes, I am. I am a career employee. So I'm not a political appointee. So typically speaking, a political appointee would transition through changes of administration. Okay. But for career employees, we are basically the long haul, the backbone, as we like to say, of the government as political.
Long haulers, right?
That's right.
All right. The other question is about the federal survey. So yes. The question is from Elizabeth Marcuson around formulating a survey for her organization. And she wants to know, is your survey platform proprietary, or is that something that can be shared? Cyrus as well, so.
Yeah, so it is proprietary, but not to us. It's the U.S. Office of Personnel Management's platform. that they administer throughout the federal government. For federal agencies, we're allowed 8 questions to add on, basically focused on any particular challenges or initiatives that we are focused on within our organization that we are seeking to gather data. But overall, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey is proprietary to that particular organization. However, if this individual is seeking to create a survey based off of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, they can use it now. It's not something that they would have to get permission from OPM. And I recommend, if you're going to do so, the information is available on the website. So you can definitely pull the questions from there. And just to let you know, some of the questions that refer to as far as the annual employee survey, which is a subset within the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, is actually regulatory required for each of the federal agencies to administer. So that's why we have that's why that particular instrument, that tool, is being used throughout the federal government. However, like I said, it's nothing that an individual cannot use for themselves if they're seeking information similar to what the survey is asking. But only understand that from a DE&I perspective, there are a limited number of questions that are centered around DE&I. The optics that OPM tends to look at when it's asking those particular survey questions are from the auspice of hiring, recruitment, and retention. So what are those factors, or what are those drivers that will allow or prevent an organization to recruit from all segments of society? And then what is it that the agencies can garner from the data to make improvements with their programs? So I just want to make sure we're clear on that particular.
So Kermit, I have a feeling the asker of this particular question is as interested in the instrument, the specific questions you asked, so that if she wants to use SurveyMonkey or some other platform at the state government level that can be utilized. Is that also proprietary?
Well, as far as the specific questions, when I say they're proprietary, meaning that you don't necessarily get a license, but you can use the questions, and you don't necessarily have to gain permission, I would say.
So if someone emailed you following the session to say, I would love to hear and see what the federal government asked of its employees.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, yeah, they can do that. And we're required by law to post our results on our website. So each federal agency is required by law, once they receive the employee viewpoint survey data, that we have approximately 120 days or so to post our results on our website. And they're more than welcome to download and look at the questions specifically. They still pertain, every agency will have the same set of questions. It's only maybe a segment within the survey itself. We call them agency specific items that are particular to that agency that'll differ, but everything else will be the same.
Now, don't call me the mean moderator, but I'm going to ask you guys to shorten your responses because it's 4:43 and we want to get through as much as we can. Okay. So,
no problem.
So please promise. So I'm coming to you next, Cyrus, and it's a toughie. Okay. And you work with the DOD. There's been a lot in the news about the DOD, women in combat, LGBTQ plus issues. You mentioned the hair situation. What is it like trying to recruit? I'm going to this anonymous attendee, and I'm going to try to paraphrase the question around making people want to choose your organization despite some negative press. What is it that you all do based on the data or from a communications perspective to overcome these challenges? You're on mute, and we want to hear every word you have to say.
Thank you. A great question, fair question. And one thing that we do is we target those influencers, those who are in the communities that really have the reach, to those who are aspiring to enter public service, and most importantly, to support their nation's cloth, the red, white, and blue. And most importantly with that, we are targeting those 17 through 44-year-olds who are eligible to enlist, and looking at the segments of society where we can target our recruitment initiatives to ensure they're considering the United States military as not only a job, but as a career. And we are looking for those types of individuals who are seeking to enlist. We realize that we can make—
Cyrus.
What's that?
What's an influencer in your
So an influencer is someone who's active in the community. It could be maybe someone who's a leader within their church, someone who's a leader within their civic groups, someone who people look up to, and oftentimes influencers are those who are the parents, those who are non-English speakers, spending time with those families to ensure that they have an opportunity to see exactly what their children are signing up for.
Wow. I did not know the military did that. I should have, I guess. It's one of the largest entities in the federal government. So, Marta, I'm coming to you, and we're at 4:45, but we're going to make it work. We're going to get them all in, guys. This question from Elizabeth is about institutional racism, identifying it and dealing with it. How, there is a point of view that identifying race, diversity, and inclusion can in and of itself be not fully diverse, meaning it's, you don't have enough of these, so go get 5 of those and then you're good, check. So what's the process for making sure that it's equitable words you use and that you change the culture?
Great question. So I'll start with the part about changing culture, because I think that's really kind of the key crux here, to not just the diversity and inclusion in terms of recruiting the right people, but also retaining them and making sure that not only do people feel inclusive, but that there's equity in terms of promotions and equity in terms of the programs, how we run and distribute grants, for example, externally, and how do we in our contracting, how do we make sure there's equity throughout? And so that, I think, one of the reasons we moved the DE&I program out of the HR function into external affairs is because a lot of times, this requires some really hard conversations, uncomfortable conversations at times with employees. And so, we moved it into the external affairs to really get at the crux of, where are those blind spots and how do we have those conversations? Because there's a lot going on nationally and we come to work and people are feeling these impacts. Where do we have a forum for employees to really talk about these issues, how they impact for them personally, but also professionally in the work that they do? So it's really providing, that space and forum. And that's why it's kind of a different structure where it's under external affairs so that we can actually have these hard conversations and tackle them. For example, the question about, institutional racism, like specific examples of that, in past practices, an example I could give is, some of the naming of our facilities. We have a facility or waterway, I think, called Junipero Serra. And for certain communities, like Native American communities and people within the organization, then that is, offensive to certain groups. And so, that was, probably a name that was put in place many, many decades before. But how do we, as an organization, revisit that and take a look at those practices so that, we make sure that we are being inclusive and equitable internally, but also externally with the community. So there's, a whole slew of potential programs and policies and practices that we need to look at. The office is brand new, so we're just barely scratching the tip. We're going to be doing an organizational assessment, just kind of like Kermit and Cyrus explained. We're going to be doing our own organizational assessment to get that information from the employees and then figure out from there, how do we build a strategic plan that then addresses those issues.
How new are you? How old is it, or how young is it, your area?
The Office of Racial Equity, Diversity, Inclusion just got started in July. So we've just been a few months in. so
I
just
can
basically
speak to these naming conventions. So where I live, so I'm from the South. I told you the Commonwealth of Virginia. Y'all remember the song "Carry Me Back to Old Virginia." In my area, it never even occurred to me, and that's why it needs a communicator to look at it sometimes. There is a road called Black Hanging Tree Road. So when you say the road, you really don't even think about it. And then you say, oh, well, wait a minute. I think there probably were some Black people hung on that road back in the day. And so when the neighborhood was up in arms, the majority community didn't get it. I never even heard of this road until it came to pass. So it's good that it's in the comms function and that you all have the forum. That's what I heard you say, that you all have the surveys and that you all are overseeing it from the communications platform. So Carmen, I want to come to you and ask you two questions. One from Michael Grimaldi. He's asking about audits and the type of issues that you all oversee. I think that has a lot to do with compliance, but I want to also ask you about best practices in the DE&I space for governmental entities. Who do you look to for best practices? Who are you modeling yourself against and you think is doing it well?
Well, so your first question regarding the audit, one of the key functions that we look at, you are right, is in the compliance. So to making sure that when a recruitment is performed, there are regulations that are being adhered to make sure that the recruitment is done in a compliant manner. One of the key challenges that all federal organizations, including ourselves, have had in the past is how to adjudicate veterans' preference. That's one of the key areas. Other areas, we focus on as well as far as the diversity of the recruitment. How are you strategically recruiting? Are you casting the net as wide as possible, or are you only going to certain venues or pipelines for your recruitment? And what has been the result? So in that regard, we look at that and we take that into consideration when we're conducting an audit. The other part of it is a best practice that we are identifying is the inclusion of EEO managers when we're having discussions with the recruitment officials and with the HR practitioners. How involved are EEO managers in those discussions? And so of late, we've looked at our audits to acquire that information to see, is EEO in the discussion? Are they at the table as far as when we're talking about recruitment strategies? And I know that moving forward in FY21 and working with the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights, which has just been newly formed, we're talking about having those strategic discussions to see where the EEO managers are being impactful in the discussions of strategic recruiting. And I know that right now we're looking at their draft plan and coming up with some ideas as far as where we can pull our resources in that regard. But in terms of—
Can I ask you a direct question? What do you do if you find an audit, someone has failed an audit?
Then we write up a corrective action plan. And then we advise, as for a corrective action plan it's something that we provide to the HR office is where the deficiencies are. And then we inform them that these are the things that they need to correct. And then we'll follow up with them within 60 days to see what approaches that they make in order to correct those deficiencies.
Gotcha. All right, Cyrus, thank you for that. I really wanted to know if it was just checking another box or the report was done. So I appreciate that. So
Sure.
Cyrus, what does success look like? And how do you measure it? And what you do? I'm very interested in hearing moving the ball forward, particularly as it relates to communicating. Can you expound?
Absolutely. When we look at measuring success as especially related to inclusion and diversity, we look at it from a macro to micro level. So look at DoD corporate, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Under the Secretary, we have 3 military departments: Department of the Air Force, Department of the Army, Department of the Navy. And then we have 5 military services: Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and the Space Force. We ensure that we have leadership and representation from each of those entities on two groups. The first is our Defense Equal Opportunity Reform Group. That consists of senior executives and our general and flag officers who represent those organizations. We also have a Defense Diversity Work Group. That is the action officer cohort representative of the military services that come together, and we talk about gaps in policies, inconsistencies, areas that we need to ensure that we bolster. And then within that group, we also have a diversity and inclusion metrics working group so that we can target how are we holding ourselves accountable doing site visits, compliance visits, and ensuring that we have the mechanisms in place to say that when we put a policy into practice, that there will be as Kermit mentioned, a corrective action plan or an implementation plan to ensure we are all in accordance with the policies that we put forward from the Office of the Secretary. So we feel we have a well-oiled machine, constantly seeking feedback from the stakeholders, and versus looking at this from perhaps a federal, state, local level, ours is DoD corporate down to each military department, to the major commands, then down to installation, base, post, etc., depending on the missions.
And it all weaves in together. There's a through line. So we have several questions. I'm going to ask PRSA headquarters if they will put the slide up that had the titles and phone numbers for everyone as I make a few closing remarks and then turn the floor over to Barbara. So PRSA, can we put the presentation slide up that included their contact information? Because I'm going to encourage, there was a lot we didn't get to. There were a lot of questions that I had, the training and information on the harassment, how you all came to conclusions around the silos, how you all overcame the silos, and most importantly, from PRSA's point of view, how is it that you are making sure the communication lines are open? Internal communications in addition to external communication. So as we wait on headquarters to bring that particular slide up, I do want to go ahead with a few concluding remarks. Certainly, diversity and inclusion increase an agency's capacity to serve and protect people who have different experiences and backgrounds, and to further enhance these agencies to be receptive to different traditions and ideas. We must make our workplaces more inclusive. America was founded on the ideal that from many, we are one. And as a whole, we are greater than the sum of our parts. So the business case for inclusion is clear in our American history, but to gain the maximum benefit from our increasingly diverse workforce, we must make every employee feel welcome and motivated to work their very hardest. We must affirm that we work together because of our differences, not despite them. And when we tap this knowledge, when we do this, when we train our employees in team building, decision-making, problem solving, conflict resolution, we uphold the principles that are based to us. This has been an exciting conversation. I'm telling you that I've done a lot of DE&I conversations. This has been at the top of the list, guys. I've enjoyed serving as your moderator, and I now call on Ms. Burfind, event organizer, for additional feedback.
So Felicia, I'm going to see if I can share this slide. Did it come up?
You can back up one to slide 2 that shows the panelists, that would do it. There we go. And we make that big because we want everybody, just take a screenshot, take their emails, wear them out. They want to hear from you. We did not get to all the questions that were asked. And I think you're planning on a part 2, right? So,
and this is also going to be, it's also recorded and going to be shared. The other thing that we wanted to do was, the whole point behind this was this section, we wanted to do something in terms of a call to action to lead this change. So we're asking the public affairs and government members and the participants, if you would go back and tap into your organizations, at the very least, have some conversations with your human capital, human resources, whoever your personnel folks are, your EEO folks, and find out what kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion plans that you have. What are some of the best practices and lessons learned? And if you would take, just even if it's just one of those, and send those examples, those best practices to Danielle. She's up at National. And we will go ahead and get back to you with some of the best ones that we've received, because we want to keep this conversation going. We want to share the templates. Thank you all for your excellent questions today. That was really helpful. And I'm going to stop the screen share.
And I just wanted to make sure, Barbara, this deck is going to be available on your website, and the recording will also be available.
Yes, ma'am. So thank you again, everyone. I think the questions that we didn't get to, we will send you an email and follow up afterwards, but thank you again so much.
Yeah.
We appreciate your continued interest in the Public Affairs and Government section of PRSA. Welcome your feedback regarding our events and encourage you to share our activities with others. This now concludes our webinar. Have a great day.